My son and his in-laws invaded my retirement cabin in the woods. They even made a toast to getting the inheritance early. What they didn't know was that I had installed hidden cameras, and the blizzard trapped them. And when they saw the police had been called, their faces turned ghost white. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Erin, and at 63 years old, I thought I had seen enough betrayal in my lifetime. I was wrong. It was a crisp October morning when I decided to drive up to my retirement cabin in the Adirondacks. The place had been my sanctuary for the past 5 years, a modest 2-bedroom log house nestled among towering pines where I planned to spend my golden years in peace. The drive usually took 3 hours from Albany, but I had left early, hoping to beat the weekend traffic. I hadn't told Fred I was coming. My 35-year-old son had his own key. After all, family should be able to use the cabin when needed. That's what I believed anyway. That's what any loving mother would believe. As I turned down the gravel road leading to my property, I noticed tire tracks in the dirt. Fresh ones. My heart gave a little flutter of excitement. Maybe Fred had brought his wife Stella and their kids for a weekend getaway. It had been months since we'd all spent time together, and despite our recent tensions, I missed my grandchildren terribly. But as I approached the cabin, something felt wrong. Music was playing, loud music, and I could hear laughter echoing through the trees, multiple voices. This wasn't a quiet family retreat. I parked behind the trees, about 50 yards from the house, hidden from view. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but something told me to observe before announcing my arrival. Through the large picture window, I could see movement inside. People were gathered around my dining table, and from the looks of it, they were having quite a celebration. I crept closer, staying in the shadow of the pine trees. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. As I got nearer to the window, the voices became clearer, and what I heard made my blood turn to ice. Finally free of the old controlling witch, Fred's voice carried clearly through the glass. My son, my only child, the boy I had raised alone after his father died, was sitting at my own table, raising a glass of what looked like my good bourbon. No more guilt trips, no more manipulation, just pure freedom. Stella, his 32-year-old wife, laughed that sharp, bitter laugh I had grown to recognize over the years. I told you she'd never change, baby. Some people are just toxic, even when they're family, especially when they're family. I pressed myself against the rough bark of a pine tree, my knees suddenly weak. Were they talking about me? My hands trembled as I strained to hear more. The best part, Stella continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction, is that she actually thinks we care about her opinion. All those years of pretending to listen to her advice, nodding along like good little children. She took a swig from her glass. God, I'm so tired of pretending. Fred nodded enthusiastically. Remember last Christmas when she gave us that lecture about spending too much money? Acting like she's our financial advisor when she's just a bitter old woman living in the past. My chest tightened. Last Christmas, I had gently suggested they might want to budget more carefully after Stella mentioned their credit card debt. I thought I was being helpful, caring. Apparently, I was wrong. And don't get me started on how she thinks she knows better about raising our kids, Stella added, rolling her eyes dramatically. Like, hello, they're our children, not hers. Just because she managed to screw up one kid doesn't make her an expert. The words hit me like physical blows. Screw up one kid? Was that how they saw Fred's upbringing? The years I worked double shifts as a nurse to keep us afloat after his father died? The sacrifices I made to ensure he could go to college, to give him every opportunity I never had? But Fred didn't defend me. Instead, he laughed. You're right. She never knew when to back off, always inserting herself where she didn't belong. I sank lower behind the tree, my legs giving out completely. I was now crouching in the dirt, my designer jeans getting stained with pine needles and mud, but I didn't care. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional devastation washing over me. Through the window, I watched as Stella walked around my living room like she owned it, picking up my belongings and examining them with obvious disdain. She paused at the mantelpiece, where I kept family photos, and made a disgusted face. "Look at all these pictures of herself," she called out to Fred. "Narcissistic much? When we inherit this place, the first thing I'm doing is burning every single one of these." Inherit this place? My hands clenched into fists. This cabin represented everything I had worked for, every overtime shift, every weekend I spent planning and saving instead of relaxing. And they were already dividing it up like I was dead and buried. Fred joined his wife at the mantelpiece. "We should probably redecorate the whole place anyway. Get rid of all this country cottage nonsense and make it more modern. Maybe we could even rent it out on those vacation apps when we're not using it." "Brilliant idea," Stella purred, wrapping her arms around Fred's waist. "Extra income stream. Your mother always was too sentimental about money. No business sense whatsoever." No business sense. I had built a comfortable retirement fund through careful investing and smart financial decisions. I owned this cabin outright, had no debt, and had even helped them out financially more times than I could count. But apparently, that made me financially incompetent in their eyes. As I watched my son and daughter-in-law plan my legacy's destruction, something cold and hard settled in my chest. This wasn't just casual complaining or venting frustration. This was deliberate, calculated disrespect. They had come to my sanctuary, used my things, drank my alcohol, and were celebrating what amounted to my demise. But the worst was yet to come. Stella walked over to my kitchen and opened the refrigerator, pulling out ingredients like she lived there. "I'm starving. Want me to make us some lunch with your mom's groceries?" "Make yourself at home," Fred replied with a cruel chuckle. "After all, this will all be ours soon enough anyway." The casualness of it all, the way they moved through my space, used my belongings, spoke about my death like it was an anticipated vacation, left me breathless with shock and pain. I had to get out of there before they saw me. My discovery had to remain secret, at least for now. Whatever they were planning, whatever this was really about, I needed time to think, to process, to figure out my next move. As I quietly crept back to my car, my mind was already racing. Something told me this was bigger than just inherited disrespect. There was something calculated about their presence here, something planned, and I was going to find out exactly what my son and his wife were really up to. The drive back to Albany passed in a blur of tears and rage. By the time I reached my apartment, I had made a decision that would change everything. If Fred and Stella wanted to play games with my life and my legacy, they were about to learn that this old woman still had a few tricks up her sleeve. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the community health center. At 63, I didn't really need to work anymore, but I enjoyed helping people and it kept me busy. Today, however, I had more pressing matters to attend to. I spent the entire day researching security cameras online. By evening, I had ordered a complete surveillance system with tiny, wireless cameras that could be hidden almost anywhere. The technology amazed me. These devices were no bigger than buttons and could stream directly to my phone. The salesman assured me they were perfect for keeping an eye on vacation properties. If only he knew. While I waited for the equipment to arrive, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had witnessed. The cruelty in their voices, the casual way they dismissed decades of my love and sacrifice. It played on repeat in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I called Fred that evening, my voice carefully neutral. "Hi, honey. How are things going?" "Oh, hi, Mom." His tone was different than usual, slightly irritated, as if I were interrupting something important. "Everything's fine. Stella and I are just having a quiet weekend." A quiet weekend. The lie came so easily to him. I wondered how many other lies he had told me over the years, how many times he had smiled to my face while harboring such contempt in his heart. "That's nice, dear. Are you at home?" "Yeah, just relaxing. You know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. He was probably sitting in my cabin at that very moment, drinking my bourbon and planning how to spend my inheritance money. "Well, I won't keep you. I love you, Fred." A pause, then, reluctantly, "Love you too, Mom." But even those 3 words sounded hollow, performed rather than felt. The surveillance equipment arrived by express delivery on Tuesday. I spent Wednesday learning how to set up the system and Thursday morning driving back to the Adirondacks. This time, I parked even further away and hiked through the woods to approach the cabin from behind. They were still there. Fred's car was hidden behind the cabin, and I could smell smoke coming from the chimney. They had settled in like permanent residents. I waited until I saw them both leave in Stella's car, probably going into town for supplies, before making my move. I had about 2 hours, and I intended to use every minute. The spare key was still hidden under the fake rock where I had always kept it. As I entered my own home, I felt like a burglar, my heart pounding with nervous energy. But this was my property, my sanctuary that they had violated. The place was a mess. Empty bottles cluttered the coffee table, dirty dishes were piled in the sink, and they had clearly been sleeping in my bed. The sheets were rumpled and stained, and Stella's expensive makeup was scattered across my dresser like she owned it. But what really caught my attention was the paperwork spread across my dining table. I moved closer, my hands shaking as I examined the documents. There were real estate listings for cabins in the area, printouts of property values, and most shocking of all, what appeared to be a rough draft of a power of attorney document with my name on it. My blood ran cold as I read the legal language. They weren't just planning to inherit my cabin, they were planning to take control of all my assets while I was still alive. I quickly photographed everything with my phone, then got to work installing the cameras. I placed one in the living room, hidden behind a book on the shelf. Another went in the kitchen, disguised as part of the smoke detector. A third camera was positioned in the bedroom, and the last one I installed outside, hidden in the birdhouse that hung from the porch eaves. As I worked, I discovered more evidence of their extended stay. Stella's clothes were hanging in my closet. Fred's toiletries were arranged in my bathroom. They had moved in completely, treating my retreat like their own personal vacation home. But the most disturbing discovery was in my bedside drawer. Among my personal items, I found a notebook in Stella's handwriting. The pages were filled with calculations and plans that made my stomach turn. E's monthly income, approx $3,200, one entry read. Total assets, house in Albany, Esther $200,000. Cabin, Esther $150,000. Savings and retirement, Esther $400,000. Total worth, approximately $750,000. They had been researching my finances, calculating my net worth like I was a stock they were planning to purchase, but it got worse. Fred thinks we should wait for natural causes, another entry stated. But at 63, she could live another 20 years. Too long. Need to explore other options. Other options? My hands trembled as I read those words. What exactly did Stella mean by other options? The notebook continued with research about power of attorney laws, notes about proving mental incompetence, and what appeared to be a timeline for gaining control of assets within 6 months. I photographed every page, my mind reeling. This wasn't just greed or impatience about inheritance. This was a calculated plan to steal my life's work while I was still alive to suffer through it. I heard a car approaching and quickly closed the notebook, placing it back exactly where I had found it. Through the window, I watched Stella's bright red sedan pull into the driveway. I had just enough time to slip out the back door and disappear into the woods. From my hiding spot among the trees, I watched them unload groceries. Expensive groceries purchased with money they didn't have, probably charging everything to credit cards they expected me to pay off eventually. That evening, safe in my Albany apartment, I logged into the surveillance app on my phone. The cameras were working perfectly, giving me clear views of my violated sanctuary. What I saw over the next few hours confirmed my worst fears. Fred and Stella weren't just staying at my cabin. They were living there full-time. They had brought more belongings, had clearly been there for weeks, and their conversations, now that they thought they were completely alone, revealed the true depth of their betrayal. I found a lawyer who specializes in elder law, Stella was saying as she prepared dinner in my kitchen. He says if we can prove she's becoming mentally unstable, we can petition for guardianship. Fred looked uncomfortable. Stella, I don't know about this. She seems pretty sharp to me. Of course she seems sharp to you. She's your mother. You don't see the signs because you don't want to see them. Stella's voice was patient, like she was explaining something simple to a child. But think about it. She lives alone. She's becoming more isolated. She sometimes repeats herself when she tells stories. A good lawyer could work with that. But what if she fights it? Stella smiled, and even through the grainy camera footage, I could see the coldness in her expression. Then we make sure she has something bigger to worry about. A fall down the stairs, maybe. A gas leak. An accident. The blood drained from my face. Was she actually suggesting what I thought she was suggesting? Fred jumped up from the table. Jesus, Stella. You can't be serious. Calm down, she said dismissively. I'm not talking about anything dramatic. Just something that would make her seem fragile, confused, unable to care for herself safely. That's that's my mother you're talking about. Stella's mask of patience slipped slightly. Your mother who treats you like a child, who controls every aspect of our lives with her guilt trips and her money. Your mother who thinks she knows better than everyone else about everything. When was the last time you made a decision without worrying about what Aaron would think? Fred was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so low I almost couldn't hear it, she wasn't always like that, wasn't she? Stella moved closer to him, her voice becoming gentle and manipulative. Think about growing up. Think about how she always had to be the center of attention. Always the martyr working so hard for poor little Freddie. She turned your father's death into her personal tragedy and made you feel guilty for existing. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. How dare she twist my grief, my struggle into something selfish. I had worked myself to the bone to give Fred a good life after his father died suddenly of a heart attack when Fred was only 12. But Fred was nodding slowly, and I watched in horror as Stella rewrote our family history. You're right, he said finally. She did make everything about her suffering. Even when I got married, she had to make comments about how young we were, how we should wait. Like she couldn't stand seeing me happy. That wasn't true. I had concerns about Fred marrying Stella after only knowing her for 8 months, but I had kept most of my doubts to myself and had tried to be supportive. Exactly, Stella purred, wrapping her arms around him. And now she's alone and bitter, and she wants to drag us down with her, unless we take control first. As I watched my son nodding along with his wife's poisonous words, I realized that my discovery at the cabin was only the beginning. Whatever Fred and Stella were planning, it was far more dangerous than simple greed. They weren't just after my money. They were after my life itself. And from the looks of things, they were willing to do whatever it took to get it. By Friday morning, the weather forecast was predicting what meteorologists were calling a historic blizzard, the kind that hits the Adirondacks maybe once every 10 years. They were talking about 2 to 3 feet of snow, winds up to 60 miles per hour, and temperatures dropping to 20 below zero. The kind of storm that could trap people for days. Perfect. I had been monitoring Fred and Stella through my cameras for 3 days now, watching their elaborate charade of playing house in my sanctuary. They had grown comfortable, careless even. Stella had started rearranging my furniture to suit her taste, and Fred had brought his gaming equipment from home, setting it up in my living room like he was moving in permanently. But what disturbed me most were their continued conversations about gaining control of my assets. They had contacted that elder law attorney Stella mentioned, and I watched through the cameras as they practiced their story about my supposed mental decline. Remember, Stella coached Fred as they sat at my dining table, don't oversell it. Just mention how she's been repeating herself, how she seems confused about dates sometimes. Maybe mention that time she forgot she already invited us to dinner and called to invite us again. That had happened once, 6 months ago, because I had genuinely forgotten in the chaos of helping my neighbor through a medical emergency. But in Stella's version, it became evidence of dementia. What if they want to examine her? Fred asked nervously. They will. That's when we implement phase 2 of the plan. Stella's smile was chilling. A little fall, maybe a bump on the head. Nothing fatal, just enough to make her seem fragile and confused. Then we swoop in as the concerned family members who need to protect her from herself. I had heard enough. It was time to turn the tables. The blizzard was supposed to hit Saturday evening, but I had been tracking its progress obsessively. Weather patterns in the mountains could be unpredictable, and I was counting on this storm to be everything the forecasters promised. Saturday afternoon, I loaded my car with supplies and drove to a small motel about 30 miles from the cabin. Close enough to monitor the situation, but far enough away to have power and heat when the storm hit. The place was run by an elderly couple who remembered me from previous visits, and they were happy to let me check in early. "Storm's supposed to be a real monster," the desk clerk told me as he handed me the room key. "You picked a good time to get off the mountain roads." If only he knew how carefully I had planned this timing. By 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon, the first snowflakes were falling. I watched through my phone as Fred and Stella moved around the cabin, completely oblivious to what was coming. They had groceries for maybe 3 days, enough firewood for a normal weekend, and no understanding of how quickly conditions could deteriorate in the mountains. The snow started falling harder around 6 o'clock. Through the cameras, I could see Fred looking out the window with growing concern. "Maybe we should head back to Albany," he said to Stella, who was cooking dinner in my kitchen. "The roads are getting pretty bad." "Don't be such a worrier," Stella replied dismissively. "It's just snow. We have 4-wheel drive." But I knew something they didn't. The access road to my cabin was notoriously difficult in winter weather. It was a narrow, winding path that hadn't been plowed yet, and with the way the snow was accumulating, it would be impassable within hours. By 8 o'clock, the storm was in full force. The wind was howling through the trees, and snow was falling so heavily that the cameras could barely see across the yard. I watched Fred try to open the front door, only to find a 3-foot drift had already formed against it. "Stella!" he called out, and I could hear the panic creeping into his voice even through the surveillance audio. "We might have a problem." She joined him at the door, and I saw her face change as she realized the severity of their situation. "This is more than they predicted," she said, her usual confidence wavering. "We need to try to get out now before it gets worse," Fred said, already reaching for his coat. But when they opened the garage door, they discovered what I had been hoping for. The driveway was completely impassable, buried under several feet of snow, and their car was just a vague shape under a white mound. "We're stuck," Stella said flatly. "It's fine," Fred tried to reassure her, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "People get snowed in all the time in the mountains. We'll just wait it out." What they didn't know was that I had taken some precautions to ensure their stay would be as uncomfortable as possible. 3 months ago, when I first started suspecting something was wrong with Fred's behavior, I had upgraded the cabin's heating system to a smart thermostat that I could control remotely. I had also installed a master electrical panel that would allow me to control power to different parts of the house from my phone. As the storm raged outside, I began my own campaign from the safety of my motel room. First, I turned the heat down to 55 degrees, not enough to cause real harm, but cold enough to make them miserable. Within an hour, I could see them bundling up in extra clothes and starting a fire in the fireplace. "Why is it so cold in here?" Stella complained, checking the thermostat. "This thing says 55 degrees. Fred examined the unit, pressing buttons randomly. "I don't know how to work Mom's fancy system. Maybe the storm affected it somehow." "Well, figure it out. I'm freezing." But no matter what Fred did, he couldn't override my remote control. I watched with grim satisfaction as they piled blankets on the couch and huddled together by the fire. Around midnight, I cut the power to the kitchen. The refrigerator went dark, along with the microwave and electric stove. They still had the gas burners, but no way to keep food cold or use any of the other appliances. "Now the power's going out," Fred said, flipping switches uselessly. "This is turning into a nightmare." "It's just sections of the house," Stella observed, noting that the living room lights still worked. Maybe the storm damaged something. I let them stew in the cold and confusion for several hours before implementing the next phase of my plan. At 3 a.m, I turned off the power to the well pump. By morning, they would have no running water. Sunday dawned gray and brutal. The storm had dumped nearly 3 feet of snow overnight, and the wind was still howling. Through the cameras, I watched Fred and Stella wake up to a harsh new reality. "The water's not working," Fred announced after trying the kitchen faucet. "Nothing's coming out." Stella tried the bathroom sink with the same result. "How is that possible?" "The pump must have frozen or lost power," Fred said, though he clearly had no idea how to fix it. "We'll have to melt snow for drinking water." I watched them trudge outside in the blinding snow, struggling to fill pots with snow to melt on the gas stove. They were already exhausted, and it was only the first full day. But the real test of their partnership was about to begin. By Sunday afternoon, with no heat, no running water, and limited food options, the stress was starting to show. I watched through the cameras as their perfect little charade began to crack. "This is your fault," Stella snapped at Fred as he struggled to start another fire. "I told you we should have left yesterday morning." "You're the one who said it was just snow," Fred shot back. "You're the one who wanted to stay and enjoy the storm. Don't you dare blame me for your mother's crappy cabin in the middle of nowhere. What kind of place doesn't have a backup generator? It's not a crappy cabin, and if you hadn't insisted on staying here so long, we would have been home safe." I leaned forward in my motel room chair, fascinated by how quickly their united front was crumbling. When they were plotting against me, they were a team. But under pressure, their true colors were showing. "You know what?" Stella stood up, wrapping a blanket around herself like armor. "I'm starting to think your mother was right about you. You can't handle responsibility. You can't make decisions. You're just a weak man who needs someone else to think for him." The words hit Fred like a physical blow. "Don't you dare bring my mother into this. You're the one who's been poisoning me against her." "Poisoning you? I opened your eyes. Your mother is a controlling, manipulative woman who's been treating you like a child your entire life, and you're too weak to see it." "She's not controlling. She cares about me." "Oh, please, she cares about owning you, just like she owns this stupid cabin and everything else in her life. She's a lonely, bitter old woman who can't stand to see other people happy." I felt tears stinging my eyes, even though I had expected this. Hearing my son defend me, even weakly, was a small comfort, but Stella's venom was working its way back into his mind. "Maybe you're right," Fred said finally, his voice defeated. "Maybe I am weak, but at least I'm not a heartless bitch who plots to steal from old women." The silence that followed was deafening. Even through the camera's limited audio, I could feel the tension crackling between them. "What did you just call me?" Stella's voice was dangerously quiet. "You heard me. A heartless bitch. That's what you are, Stella. And I'm starting to wonder why I ever married you." Stella's face went white with rage. "You married me because I was the best thing that ever happened to your pathetic life. And if you don't remember that, maybe I should remind you of a few things." "Like what?" "Like who came up with the plan to get your mother's money in the first place? Like who's been doing all the research and making all the arrangements while you sat around feeling guilty? Like who's going to make us rich while you're too much of a coward to do what needs to be done?" Fred stared at her, and I watched something shift in his expression. "You're right. You did come up with the plan. All of it. I never wanted to hurt her." "Well, it's too late now. We're already committed. Your mother is going to sign those papers one way or another." "And if she doesn't?" Stella's smile was cold and calculating. "Then we'll make sure she has an accident that leaves her unable to refuse." Even through the grainy surveillance footage, I could see Fred's face go pale. He was finally understanding what kind of woman he had married, what kind of monster he had let into his life, and what kind of danger I was really in. As I watched my son and his wife tear each other apart in my violated sanctuary, I realized that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one I was about to unleash on their lives. The real blizzard was just beginning. By Monday morning, Fred and Stella had been trapped in my cabin for 2 days, with minimal heat, no running water, and dwindling supplies. The storm was finally beginning to weaken, but the damage to their relationship was just beginning to show. I watched through my cameras as they moved around each other like hostile strangers, speaking only when necessary. Fred had spent the night on the couch, wrapped in every blanket he could find, while Stella claimed the bedroom. The romantic partnership that had seemed so united in their plans against me was fracturing under pressure. But I wasn't done with them yet. From my comfortable motel room, I had been monitoring not just the weather, but also the local emergency services. The roads were still impassable, and it would be at least another day before plows could reach the remote mountain roads. Fred and Stella were going to be stuck together a little while longer. Around noon on Monday, I decided to escalate their discomfort. I turned off the power to the entire cabin except for one outlet in the living room. Let them figure out how to manage with virtually no electricity. Now everything's out. Fred's voice carried clearly through the surveillance audio as he flipped light switches uselessly. What the hell is wrong with this place? It's a piece of junk. That's what's wrong with it. Stella snapped from the kitchen, where she was trying to open a can of soup by candlelight. Your precious mother's little retirement dream is falling apart just like everything else in her life. Don't talk about her like that. Why not? She's not here to defend herself. And after what we're planning to do to her, does it really matter what I say? Fred went quiet, and I leaned closer to my phone screen, straining to catch every nuance of their body language. Something was shifting in him, some internal struggle that I found fascinating to watch. Stella, he said finally, I've been thinking about this whole thing. Maybe we should just wait for her to die naturally. I mean, she's 63. That's not exactly young. Stella stopped trying to open the can and turned to stare at him. Are you kidding me right now? We've been planning this for months. We've already put things in motion, and now you're getting cold feet? It's not cold feet. It's conscience, maybe. She's my mother. She's a bitter old woman who's been controlling your life since you were born. Stella slammed the can down on the counter so hard it dented. She made you feel guilty for breathing, Fred. She turned you into a weak, indecisive man who can't make a move without worrying about what mommy thinks. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you made a decision, any decision, without considering how it would affect her feelings? When did you last do something you wanted instead of something she approved of? Fred was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was small and uncertain. She sacrificed a lot for me after Dad died. Did she? Or did she just make sure you never forgot about her sacrifices? There's a difference, Fred. A manipulative parent doesn't let you forget what they've done for you. They use it as a weapon. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Was that really how Fred saw my love? Had every sacrifice I made, every extra shift I worked, every dream I deferred for his sake, had all of that been perceived as manipulation? But Stella wasn't finished destroying my son's faith in me. You want to know something funny? She continued, her voice taking on a cruel edge. Your mother isn't even your biological mother. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Fred went completely still. What did you just say? You heard me. She's not your real mother. Well, she gave birth to you, but you're not her husband's child. That's impossible. You're lying. Stella pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like saved photos. Remember when I was helping her organize those old photo albums last Christmas? I found some interesting paperwork mixed in with the pictures. Medical records from when you were born. She showed him the phone screen, and even through the surveillance camera, I could see Fred's face go white. Your father, her husband, was deployed overseas for 14 months before you were born. Military records don't lie, Fred. The timeline doesn't work. My hands flew to my mouth as I watched my son's world shatter. Yes, the secret Stella had discovered was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. It was so much more complicated than she was making it seem. Fred's biological father was my late husband's best friend, Marcus, who had comforted me during a particularly difficult period when David was overseas. It happened once, during a moment of loneliness and fear, and I had regretted it immediately. When I discovered I was pregnant, I prayed the child was David's, but the timing made it impossible. I never told David, and Marcus moved across the country shortly after. When David returned from deployment, he assumed Fred was his son and loved him completely. David died never knowing the truth, and I had intended to take the secret to my grave. So, All those years, Stella continued with obvious satisfaction. When she was playing the martyred single mother, she was really just covering up her own adultery. Your father, the man who raised you, who loved you, was raising another man's bastard child. Stop it, Fred whispered, but there was no strength in his voice. And the best part? She let you feel guilty your entire life for being a burden to her. She made you think you owed her everything because she was such a wonderful, sacrificing mother, when really, you were just the evidence of her betrayal. Fred sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I could see his shoulders shaking, and I realized he was crying. That's why she's so controlling, Stella pressed on, clearly enjoying Fred's devastation. She's terrified someone will find out the truth. She's been living a lie for 35 years, and you're the proof of it. How long have you known? Fred's voice was muffled, broken. About 6 months. I was going to tell you eventually, but I wanted to wait for the right moment. This seemed like a good time to open your eyes about who your mother really is. 6 months. Stella had been sitting on this information for 6 months, waiting for the perfect moment to use it as a weapon. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. She doesn't deserve your guilt, Fred. She doesn't deserve your love. She certainly doesn't deserve your protection. She's a liar and a cheat who destroyed your family before you were even born. I watched my son struggle with this revelation, seeing him rewrite every memory, every moment of our relationship through this new, distorted lens. Stella was taking my greatest shame, my deepest regret, and turning it into a justification for destroying what was left of our family. But he still raised me, Fred said weakly. Dad still loved me. Because he didn't know the truth. Don't you think he deserved to know? Don't you think he had a right to decide whether he wanted to raise another man's child? I don't. I can't. Your mother robbed him of that choice. She robbed you of knowing your real father. She built your entire family on a lie. Fred looked up at Stella, and I saw something die in his eyes. You're right. She is a liar. She's worse than a liar. She's a fraud. Everything about her perfect mother act is fake. She's been manipulating you with guilt and false sacrifice for your entire life. What about the rest of the plan? Fred asked, his voice hollow. What about it? Now you know you don't owe her anything. Not love, not respect, not protection. She's just an obstacle between us and the financial security we deserve. The power of attorney papers are already drawn up. We just need her signature. And after what you've learned today, I don't think you'll have any trouble getting it. Fred was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, colder. What if she refuses to sign? Stella smiled, and there was something genuinely frightening about her expression. Then we proceed with the backup plan, a little accident that leaves her confused and dependent. Then we petition for guardianship based on her mental incapacity. What kind of accident? Nothing too dramatic. Maybe she falls down the stairs at her apartment, hits her head just hard enough to cause some confusion, some memory problems. Tragic, but not suspicious. You want me to hurt my own mother? She's not your mother, Fred. Not really. She's just the woman who lied to you for 35 years and let you think you killed your father with the stress of raising a bastard child. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. David had died of a heart attack when Fred was 12. But it was genetic. His father and grandfather had both died young of heart disease. Fred had never blamed himself for David's death, had never even suggested such a thing. But now Stella was planting that seed of guilt, twisting the knife even deeper. I never thought. Dad's heart attack wasn't it? The stress of working extra jobs to support you, the financial pressure, the sleepless nights worrying about your future. You think that didn't contribute to his early death? It was a lie, a horrible manipulation, but I could see it working on Fred's devastated psyche. Stella was taking every good memory, every loving moment, and poisoning it with suspicion and false guilt. She owes you more than money, Stella continued. She owes you a lifetime of lies. Taking her assets isn't theft. It's compensation for what she stole from you. Fred nodded slowly, and I watched my son transform before my eyes from a confused, guilty man into someone harder and more dangerous. "You're right," he said finally. "She does owe me. So you'll do whatever it takes to collect?" "Yes, whatever it takes." As I watched this conversation unfold, I realized that Stella hadn't just revealed my secret to hurt Fred. She had weaponized it, turned it into justification for whatever they were planning to do to me. And from the cold determination I now saw in my son's eyes, I knew that whatever was coming next was going to be far worse than anything I had imagined. The storm outside might have been weakening, but the real tempest was just beginning, and I was about to find out exactly how far my own son would go to destroy the woman who had raised him. Even if that woman wasn't perfect, even if she had made terrible mistakes, even if she had loved him more than her own life, despite everything. Tuesday morning brought the sound of snowplows in the distance, their rumbling engines cutting through the mountain silence like mechanical thunder. From my motel room, I watched the surveillance footage as Fred and Stella heard the same sound and rushed to the windows of my cabin. "Finally!" Stella exclaimed, pressing her face against the glass. "We can get out of this nightmare," but I had other plans. Over the past 3 days, I had been busy with more than just watching my son and daughter-in-law destroy each other. I had been building a case. Every conversation, every revelation, every damning word had been recorded on my surveillance system. But more importantly, I had been gathering evidence of their illegal activities. The forged power of attorney documents, the research into my financial assets, the plans to have me declared mentally incompetent, and most damning of all, their recorded conversations about causing me accidents to facilitate their theft. At 9:30 Tuesday morning, I made the call I had been planning for days. "State Police, how can I help you?" "This is Aaron Walsh. I need to report a break-in and attempted fraud at my property in the Adirondacks." My voice was steady, calm, betraying none of the emotional turmoil of the past few days. "What's the nature of the incident, ma'am?" "My son and his wife have illegally occupied my cabin and are planning to steal my assets through forged documents and false claims of mental incompetence. I have video evidence of everything." There was a pause. "Ma'am, are you sure this isn't a family dispute that should be handled civilly?" "Officer, they have discussed causing me physical harm to facilitate their theft. This is criminal conspiracy, fraud, and potentially attempted assault. I have hours of recorded evidence." That got their attention. Within an hour, I was sitting in the county sheriff's office, handing over copies of every recording, every photograph, every piece of evidence I had gathered. Sheriff Rebecca Martinez listened with growing amazement as I played back Fred and Stella's conversations. "Mrs. Walsh," she said when I finished, "this is one of the most comprehensive cases of elder abuse conspiracy I've ever seen. Your son and daughter-in-law have essentially confessed to multiple felonies on camera. What happens now?" "Now we go arrest them. But I have to ask, are you sure you want to press charges against your own son?" I thought about that question for a long moment. 3 days ago, I might have hesitated. 3 days ago, I still believed that Fred was fundamentally good, just misled by his manipulative wife. But after watching him agree to physically harm me, after seeing him embrace Stella's twisted logic about my owing him compensation for being born, I knew the truth. Fred had made his choice. He had chosen greed over love, cruelty over compassion. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to press full charges against both of them." Sheriff Martinez nodded. "We'll need you to come with us to identify them and provide access to the property. Are you prepared for that confrontation?" "I've been preparing for it all week." The caravan of police vehicles wound up the mountain road slowly, snowplows having cleared only a single lane. I rode in the sheriff's SUV, my hands folded calmly in my lap despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. Through my phone app, I could see Fred and Stella packing frantically, trying to erase evidence of their extended stay. They had found some of the surveillance cameras, not all of them, but enough to realize they might have been observed. "Do you think she knows?" Fred was asking anxiously as he stuffed legal documents into a bag. "How could she know? She's been in Albany this whole time, Stella replied, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. We just need to get out of here and regroup. What if the cameras recorded us talking about the plan? Then we deny everything. It's our word against some fuzzy surveillance footage. No one's going to believe a lonely old woman's paranoid fantasies. But as we pulled into the clearing around my cabin, I saw their faces change through the window. 3 police vehicles, a sheriff's SUV, and an ambulance. Because when you're arresting people for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, you prepare for anything. Oh my God, Stella whispered, grabbing Fred's arm. This is not good. Maybe it's about something else, Fred said desperately. Maybe someone else reported the break-in. Who else would? Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. Through the surveillance cameras, I watched them realize the truth at the same moment I stepped out of the sheriff's vehicle. Even from a distance, I could see the color drain from their faces. She's here, Fred said, his voice barely audible. Mom's here. With the police? Stella added unnecessarily. Sheriff Martinez approached the cabin's front door while I hung back, still recording everything on my phone. The other officers positioned themselves around the building's exits. This is the county sheriff's office, Martinez called out, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp mountain air. We have a warrant to search these premises and arrest warrants for Fred Walsh and Stella Walsh. Please exit the building with your hands visible. The silence that followed was deafening. Through my camera feeds, I could see Fred and Stella standing frozen in my living room, clutching each other like drowning people. What do we do? Fred whispered. We lawyer up and say nothing, Stella hissed back. Nothing at all. Fred Walsh and Stella Walsh, the sheriff called again. You have 30 seconds to exit voluntarily or we're coming in. The front door opened slowly, and Fred emerged first, his hands raised, his face pale with shock and fear. Stella followed, her usual composure completely shattered. When they saw me standing behind the police vehicles, their expressions went through a remarkable transformation. Fred looked devastated, like a child caught in the worst possible lie. But Stella looked furious. You set us up, she said loudly, pointing an accusing finger at me as the officers approached with handcuffs. You crazy old bitch, you set us up. Ma'am, please remain calm, one of the officers said as he began reading them their rights. Remain calm? This woman is insane. She's been stalking us, harassing us. We were just staying at the family cabin. Sheriff Martinez looked at me questioningly, and I nodded, pulling out my phone to show the recordings. Stella Walsh, the sheriff said, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and criminal trespass. Fred Walsh, you're under arrest for the same charges, plus conspiracy to commit assault. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Fred finally found his voice. Mom, he called out, his tone pleading. Mom, please, this is all a misunderstanding. We can work this out. I walked closer, close enough to see the desperation in his eyes, the fear that was replacing his earlier coldness. A misunderstanding? I repeated calmly. Is that what you call planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my assets? We never. We were just... Is that what you call discussing how to cause me an accident so I would be too confused to resist your theft? Fred's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Beside him, Stella had gone ominously quiet, her lawyer-up strategy apparently kicking in. I have recordings of everything, I continued, my voice steady despite the pain in my heart. Every conversation, every plan, every cruel word you spoke about the woman who raised you, every detail of how you intended to rob me and hurt me. You were spying on us, Stella exploded. That's illegal. You can't record people without their consent. Sheriff Martinez looked amused. Actually, ma'am, in this state, property owners have the right to monitor their own premises. Mrs. Walsh broke no laws by installing security cameras in her own cabin. But she wasn't even here. She was manipulating the situation from a distance. What I was doing, I said, stepping closer to look Stella directly in the eyes, was protecting myself from people who wanted to steal my life's work and possibly cause me physical harm. What you were doing was committing multiple felonies. I turned to Fred, and for a moment my composure wavered. This was still my son. Still the little boy I had raised and loved despite everything. The saddest part, I said softly, is that if you had just asked for help, if you had come to me honestly about your financial problems, I would have helped you. I always helped you, Fred. All you had to do was ask. Tears were streaming down Fred's face now. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry, Stella said. She made me think. Stella didn't make you think anything, I interrupted. She showed you who you really are. She gave you permission to act on thoughts and feelings you already had. The cruelty, the greed, the willingness to hurt someone who loved you, that came from inside you, Fred. She just helped you embrace it. That's not true. I never wanted to hurt you. You agreed to cause me physical harm to steal my money. You celebrated the idea of my death. You called me controlling and manipulative and said you were glad to be free of me. I heard every word, Fred. I saw your face when you said them. As the officers led them toward the patrol cars, Stella turned back one more time, her mask of civilization completely gone. You're a vindictive old witch, she screamed. You destroyed your own family out of spite. You'll die alone and bitter, and everyone will know it's because you're too cruel to forgive. I am alone, I replied calmly, but I'm not bitter, and I'll die knowing that I protected myself from people who wanted to use me, rob me, and hurt me. That's not cruelty, Stella. That's self-preservation. Sheriff Martinez approached me as the patrol cars disappeared down the mountain road. Mrs. Walsh, there will be a court hearing next week. The district attorney will want to go over your evidence in detail. I'll be there. I have to ask, are you sure about pressing charges? This will likely mean significant jail time for both of them, especially your son. I looked back at my cabin, violated and damaged by people I had trusted. Then I thought about the recordings, the plans they had made, the casual way they had discussed destroying me. Sheriff, I said finally, my son chose his path. He chose greed over love, cruelty over kindness. Those choices have consequences. I'm not responsible for protecting him from the results of his own decisions anymore. She nodded respectfully. What will you do now? I looked around at the snow-covered mountains, the pristine wilderness that had always been my sanctuary. For the first time in days, it felt peaceful again. I'm going to reclaim my life, I said. And I'm going to live it for myself, not for people who see me as nothing but a source of money to steal. As the sheriff's vehicles departed, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my violated sanctuary, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Complete, uncompromising freedom from the weight of other people's expectations, manipulations, and greed. For the first time in my life, I was truly free to be myself. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my cabin watching the morning mist rise from the lake below. The same mountains surrounded me, the same pine trees whispered in the breeze, but everything had changed. Most importantly, I had changed. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Fred was sentenced to 18 months in minimum security prison and 5 years probation. Stella received 2 years in state prison and a 10-year restraining order preventing her from contacting me. The charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and criminal trespass had been ironclad, thanks to their own recorded confessions. But the real justice wasn't in their sentences. It was in the peace I had found. I spent the first month after their arrest simply cleaning my cabin, removing every trace of their presence. I replaced the bedding they had soiled, repainted the rooms they had occupied, and installed new security systems, not out of paranoia, but simply because I could afford to protect what was mine. The hardest part was going through Fred's childhood belongings, stored in boxes in my basement. Photos of birthday parties, school awards, Mother's Day cards written in crayon. All the evidence of a relationship I had thought was built on love, but which had apparently been poisoned by resentment I never knew existed. I burned most of it in a ceremonial fire by the lake one evening in November. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed to let go of the mother I had been, the woman who had defined herself through sacrifice and service to ungrateful people. The woman I was becoming was someone entirely different. My first step toward rebuilding my life was updating my will. Everything I owned would now go to charity. Specifically, organizations that helped elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse. If my assets couldn't benefit my family, they would at least protect other families from similar betrayals. The second step was more personal. I hired a genealogist to help me locate Marcus, Fred's biological father. After 35 years, I felt I owed him the truth about his son, even if that truth was painful. We met at a quiet restaurant in Portland, where Marcus had built a successful career as an engineer. He was 68 now, graying and distinguished, with Fred's same eyes and stubborn chin. When I told him everything, about Fred's birth, about the secret I had kept, about what his son had become, he listened with quiet dignity. "I always wondered," he said finally. "When I saw his picture on your Christmas cards, the resemblance was striking. But I assumed I was seeing things I wanted to see. Do you want to meet him?" I asked. "When he gets out of prison?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out the restaurant window at the harbor beyond. "What kind of man did he become, Aaron?" "Really?" I told him the truth. About Fred's weakness, his willingness to be manipulated, his ultimate choice to participate in plans to hurt me. I didn't sugarcoat anything or make excuses. "Then no," Marcus said sadly. "I don't think I want to meet him. I've built a good life, raised 3 children who love and respect me. I don't need the complications of a son who would plot against his own mother." We parted on good terms, but with the understanding that this chapter was closed. Some secrets, once revealed, don't lead to healing. Sometimes they just confirm that the choices made long ago were the right ones. My third step toward freedom was the most challenging, learning to be alone without being lonely. For decades, my identity had been wrapped up in being needed. I was Fred's mother, the woman who sacrificed for her child. I was the reliable friend who could be counted on to help in any crisis. I was the dependable employee who stayed late and worked holidays. Now, for the first time since I was 28 years old, I had no one depending on me for anything. The silence was terrifying at first. No phone calls asking for money or advice or emotional support. No guilt trips about missed dinners or forgotten birthdays. No one monitoring my choices or questioning my decisions. Just quiet. I spent my first Christmas alone in 40 years, and instead of feeling sad, I felt liberated. I cooked exactly what I wanted to eat, watched movies I enjoyed, and went to bed early without worrying about anyone else's schedule or needs. On New Year's Eve, I threw my own party. A party of one, with good wine and better music, celebrating not the arrival of a new year, but the death of an old version of myself. Spring brought new beginnings in ways I hadn't expected. I joined a hiking group for women over 50, and for the first time in decades, I made friends who knew nothing about my past, who liked me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. There was Margaret, a retired teacher who had divorced her cheating husband at 60 and was learning to rock climb. Linda, a former nurse who had lost her husband to cancer and was now volunteering at an animal shelter. Patricia, a grandmother whose adult children lived across the country and who was building a life that didn't revolve around waiting for their visits. We were all women who had been defined by our relationships to other people and were now discovering who we were as individuals. The bond between us was stronger than any family connection I had ever experienced, because it was based on choice rather than obligation. "You know what I love about this group?" Margaret said one afternoon as we rested at a mountain overlook. "Nobody here expects anyone else to fix their problems or make them happy. We just enjoy each other's company." That was it exactly. For the first time in my adult life, I was part of a group where the relationships were balanced, where everyone gave and took equally, where no one was keeping score. As summer arrived, I made a decision that surprised even me. I put my Albany apartment on the market and moved to the cabin full-time. The place that had been violated by Fred and Stella was now truly mine, cleaned and reclaimed and filled with new memories. I converted the spare bedroom into an art studio and took up watercolor painting, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for when I was busy being indispensable to other people. I wasn't particularly good at it, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was doing something purely for my own enjoyment. I adopted a dog from the local shelter, a 3-year-old golden retriever named Sunny, who had been abandoned by a family that decided they didn't want the responsibility anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me, but Sunny and I understood each other. We were both learning to trust again. On a warm evening in July, exactly 1 year after I had discovered Fred and Stella's betrayal, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Fred, written in the careful handwriting I remembered from his childhood homework. "Dear Mom," it began, and I almost stopped reading right there. But curiosity won out. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, what we did, and I'm horrified by the person I became. Stella is divorcing me, by the way. She blames me for getting caught, says I was too weak to go through with the plan properly. Maybe she's right about that. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to make excuses. I know what we did was unforgivable. I just wanted you to know that I remember now who you really were when I was growing up. I remember the night shifts you worked so I could have new school clothes. I remember how you sat with me in the emergency room when I broke my arm, even though you had worked a double shift and were exhausted. I remember the way you cheered at my graduation, louder than any other parent there. Stella convinced me that those memories were fake, that you were just manipulating me with false love. But they weren't fake. They were real. And you were real. And I threw it all away for money that wasn't even mine to take. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and that I finally understand what I destroyed. When I get out of here, I'm going to try to become the kind of man you deserve to have as a son. I know it's too late for us, but maybe it's not too late for me to be better than I was. I hope you're happy, Mom. I hope you're finally free to live for yourself instead of for people who didn't appreciate what they had. Love, Fred P.S. I never thanked you for not telling me about my biological father when I was young. I understand now why you kept that secret. You were protecting me from confusion and pain, just like you protected me from everything else. Thank you for that. I read the letter 3 times, sitting on my deck with Sunny at my feet, and my evening tea growing cold in my hands. There was genuine remorse in Fred's words, real understanding of what he had lost and why. But it was too late. Not because I couldn't forgive him. I had already forgiven him, for my own peace if nothing else. It was too late because I was no longer the woman who needed to be needed, who defined herself through her relationships with other people. I was someone new now. Someone who painted terrible watercolors because they made me happy. Someone who hiked mountains with friends who chose to spend time with me. Someone who went to bed when she was tired and ate what she wanted, and made decisions based on her own desires rather than other people's expectations. I was free. That evening, I wrote a short letter back to Fred. I accept your apology, and I hope you do become a better man. But I won't be part of that journey. I've spent enough of my life helping other people find themselves. Now I'm focused on my own path. I wish you well, but from a distance. Aaron. I didn't sign it Mom because I wasn't his mother anymore, not in any way that mattered. The next morning, I mailed the letter and then took Sunny for a long walk through the woods. We followed deer trails and discovered hidden streams, exploring territory I had never seen before despite owning this land for years. When we returned home, I made myself lunch and sat on the deck to eat it, watching the lake sparkle in the afternoon sun. My phone was turned off, my calendar was empty, and my evening stretched ahead of me with no obligations or expectations. For the first time in my 64 years, I belonged completely to myself, and it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I raised a glass of wine in a private toast. To freedom, I said aloud, and Sunny wagged his tail as if he understood. The mountains echoed with silence, and it was perfect. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.